Hello, IQ Stories followers. Today, I promise you will hear the strangest story you've ever come across. How can it not be strange when it happened in one of the world's most unusual countries? Our story today took place in Japan, and as you all know, Japanese stories are different. The main culprit of this incident, Futoshi Matsunaga, was killed in 1961. April 28th, Fukuoka Prefecture. He was a man born in Kokura City. Matsunaga was popular at school because of his good grades, good looks, and attractive personality. But in reality, he had a very rebellious personality from a young age, and he often broke school rules, causing trouble and told lies as if it were a meal, which earned him a bad reputation from his teachers. This was not very good. In addition, he was suspended from school for making a middle school student pregnant while in high school and got married at the age of 19. Parents' blanket. Since he was a businessman, he inherited the family business and started a company called World in 1983 to sell blankets. As a president, he showed extremes different from that of an ordinary businessman. He not only sold cheap blankets to consumers at high prices, but also forced quotas on his employees and locked them in soundproof rooms if they could not meet the quotas or if he was in a bad mood. It is said that he did not hesitate to use unbelievable assaults and verbal abuse, including administering electric shocks. Nevertheless, the employee did not dare to think about resigning, but he said, "I have a yakuza. Resignation? Just write it. I won't order the yakuza to leave you and your family alone." It was because of the threat. Even while he was married, he committed domestic violence and committed extramarital affairs with other married women. He is also said to have had affairs with 9 housewives. The accomplice, Junko Ogata, was born in 1962, 1 year younger than Matsunaga. At the time, she graduated from junior college and entered kindergarten. I was working as a teacher. Then, due to her carelessness, one of the kindergarten students suffered a minor accident. The problem was that the kindergarten student's father was a local yakuza, and Junko was constantly being threatened by the yakuza. In 1980, while looking at the graduation album, Matsunaga caught the eye of Junko Ogata, a classmate, and immediately called her. He immediately understood her situation and provided counseling for her concerns. Junko also became increasingly dependent on him, and their relationship developed rapidly. And eventually Junko committed an affair with her, even though he was married to her. Afterwards, Junko ends up staying at Matsunaga's office, even taking her own room and board. After learning that Junko was dating Matsunaga, her parents Takashige Ogata and Shizumi Ogata investigated Matsunaga's assets and career. After urging her to break up with Matsunaga, Matsunaga personally came to Takashige and Shizumi, and showing the appearance of a polite young man, succeeded in completely placating them with her words. At first, the relationship between Junko and Matsunaga was not that bad. But things started to get worse when she accidentally brought up a story about her ex-boyfriend. Matsunaga is said to have started assaulting and abusing her from then on, and gave Junko all the diaries he had previously written. After telling her to bring it, he looked at the diary, asked about the contents, and assaulted her. As the assault continued, she became distressed and complained, asking how she could trust me. But Matsunaga made the absurd statement, "Smear my name on your forearm with a cigarette." I calmly said, and in the end, I had to do it. Unable to endure Matsunaga's abuse, she eventually died in 1985. In February, she tried to commit suicide at her parents' house, but she failed. After her suicide attempt, Matsunaga further abused her, forcing her to leave her parental home and quit her job as a kindergarten teacher. It also caused me to cut off contact with people around me. Even at that time, Matsunaga had not yet divorced. This caused her to become absolutely submissive to Matsunaga, which caused even greater misfortune. Matsunaga's blanket sales business ended in 1992 when customers and employees could not endure it and reported it to the police. It ended in July, and Matsunaga was found guilty of fraud and blackmail. He was wanted for threatening. In 1996, while the prosecution investigation was sluggish, he was fleeing. In January, Matsunaga remembers Kumio Toraya, a former real estate company employee who had previously suggested to her that she set up her own fake company and sneaks into Kitakyushu City with Junko, where she meets Kumio Toraya and his 17-year-old daughter, was kidnapped. Afterwards, she took advantage of Toraya's minor crimes and abused and tortured her, using the child as a weakness. Matsunaga is said to have enjoyed the most by tying Toraya to her bathtub and subjecting her to electric torture. Matsunaga, who had all the children under his control, exploited the Ogata family to his heart's content. Kazuya gave Matsunaga his license and car. He had to leave the keys and obtain permission whenever necessary, and he had to report the money he needed to Matsunaga one by one to receive her money and use an IOU. Even when going to Kurume City, Kazuya had to call Matsunaga and report where she was and what she was doing. When his funds ran low, he asked Takashige to run Nongyu Bank. He takes out a loan and Shizumi becomes a consumer. They borrowed money from a financial institution, and Riko and Kazuya resigned, received severance pay, and gave it to Matsunaga. When other relatives became suspicious of this series of actions, they sent an inspector to isolate him. When it became difficult for her to borrow or raise money anymore, Matsunaga imprisoned all 6 members of the Ogata family and tortured them into hearing what they were saying to each other. The Ogata family, whose weaknesses were exploited by Matsunaga, became warring and suspicious of each other, and eventually came under Matsunaga's control. At this time, the method by which Matsunaga completely took control of the family's psychology was a typical narcissist's gaslighting technique. He who even committed murder is considered a very bad and malicious person. After that, Matsunaga went into full-scale murder. First of all, the criterion is Matsunaga's crime. Second crime, death by injury. On December 21, 1997, Matsunaga instructed Junko to electrocute Junko's father, Takashige, and Takashige died in the process. Third crime, incitement to murder. On January 20, 1998, when Junko's mother, Shizumi, went crazy and screamed due to repeated electric torture, Matsunaga was concerned that the crime would be discovered, so he encouraged Junko, Riko, and Kazuya to be murdered, predeceased by 2 daughters and son-in-law. Fourth crime, incitement to murder. On February 10, 1998, when Junko's younger sister, Riko, was unable to hear due to her hearing weakening due to repeated electric torture, Matsunaga incited Kazuya and his daughter Aya to kill Riko, predeceased by her husband and daughter. Fifth crime, intentional murder due to negligence. Kazuya's body also weakened due to repeated electric torture and dietary restrictions, so Matsunaga locked Kazuya in the bathroom. On April 13, 1998, Kazuya eventually starved to death in the bathroom. Sixth crime, instruction to murder. Kazuya's daughter Aya begged Matsunaga, "I will never tell this to anyone. I will not even tell my younger brother. Please just let me go home." Matsunaga then said, "I feel sorry for Yuki, so why not let her go to her mother, Riko?" She subtly suggested that she kill Yuki. Aya eventually fell for Matsunaga's clever words and murdered her younger brother on May 17, 1998, saying, "I will take her to her mother." Junko also participated in her crime, predeceased by her sister and her aunt. Seventh crime, inciting murder. To silence Aya, Matsunaga encouraged Junko to commit murder by telling Junko, "That guy, Aya, is likely to confess if he gets caught by the police, so we should kill him." On June 7, 1998, Aya was strangled by Junko, deceased by her aunt. The sixth and seventh crimes are characterized by the killing of children, which contrasts with the saving of a 3-year-old child who had no ability to express normal opinions or judge the situation. It is presumed that this is because 5- and 10-year-old children had some possibility of testifying about the crime. When the situation reached this point, out of the 7 members of the Ogata family, the only one left alive was Junko, who had been Matsunaga's accomplice in the first place. However, she did not kill Toraya's daughter, with whom she lived, and did not make her participate in the crime. Meanwhile, Toraya's daughter, who was first imprisoned with her father, Toraya, at the age of 17, and then held captive by Matsunaga for several years, was released in 2002. On January 30th, when Matsunaga's surveillance was temporarily relaxed, he escaped to the home of Toraya's parents, that is, the grandparents of Toraya's daughter, who lived in Kitakyushu. He lived at the grandparents' house for about 15 days, working part-time and working as a citizen. I built the foundation for my life by signing up for health insurance. However, absurdly, her eldest mother, who was in a relationship with Matsunaga, informed him of her whereabouts, and Matsunaga immediately broke into her grandparents' house and kidnapped her again. When she was captured again, she was tortured with electricity or pinched with pliers to tear off any piece of her flesh. Although he was abused, it became clear that he was a dangerous person, so he had to be eliminated. Contrary to her previous behavior, for some reason, Matsunaga did not kill her, but merely imprisoned her. She was so gripped by extreme fear that she could not even dare to run away, despite being tortured beyond her imagination. On March 6, 2002, Toraya's daughter secretly called her grandparents' house and asked for help, telling them where she was being held. The grandparents who answered the phone reported it to the police, and the next day, March 7th, the police arrested Junko Matsunagawa was arrested. At the time of arrest, Junko Matsunagawa adamantly denied all charges and did not reveal their identities, but their identities were revealed through a photo album that Junko had. The police classified the case as Junko Matsunagawa's imprisonment of Toraya's daughter, but when Toraya's daughter confessed to killing her own father, the direction of their investigation changed to her murder. The police even cut the pipes at the suspected murder scene and asked for DNA analysis, but found nothing. This was because Matsunaga had meticulously thrown all the victims' bodies into the sea and replaced the pipes and tiles, and even if it had not been so, she was unable to find any physical evidence because nearly 4 years had passed from the time of the crime to the time it was discovered. Moreover, she was going to insist that Matsunaga did not kill her herself, even if she had physical evidence. However, Junko betrayed Matsunaga and confessed, stating that 7 people were murdered under Matsunaga's instructions, that she also participated in some of them, and that all the bodies were thrown into the sea. Although there was no physical evidence, there was circumstantial evidence, such as a statement of fact written by the Ogata family while being abused, a receipt showing the date of purchase of the saw and blade used to dismember the body, and testimony from other residents of the mansion where Matsunaga lived. Gathered. The reason why Matsunaga kept Toraya's daughter alive was later revealed. It is said that Matsunaga forced Toraya's daughter to take care of 4 children. 2 of these children were born to Junko Matsunagawa. The other 2 children were twins and were taken from another woman by taking advantage of her family's discord. As the truth was revealed, Toraya's daughter was also subject to criminal punishment for abandoning a corpse, although not as much as Junko Matsunagawa. Matsunaga said that Toraya's daughter did not particularly resist all kinds of torture, and no way, she was branded a red line and an immoral person. It appears that he was thinking, would you like to make a statement to the police? Another victim was a former employee of World who was forced by Matsunaga to run away with Matsunaga when he was wanted for fraud. This employee eventually ran away because he could not endure the abuse. Even after Matsunaga's arrest, the employee refused to make a victim statement, saying, "I don't want to face Matsunaga again," so she was not prosecuted for abusing the employee. There was also a woman who was Matsunaga's classmate. She, also a married woman, was defrauded of 11.6 million yen by Matsunaga using marriage as bait and committed suicide in Beppu Bay, Oita Prefecture in March 1994. Her 1-year-old daughter also died. Although it appeared to be an accidental death, the process was so unnatural that speculation arose that she may have been murdered, but no charges were filed due to lack of solid evidence. There is also the mother of twin children, whom Toraya's daughter was taking care of. Matsunaga made this woman work at a sex shop and extorted 25 million yen in child support. There was no connection to her crime, and she refused to make a victim impact statement, so no charges were filed in this case. Matsunaga used subtle words to make the opponent completely trust him, and then made the opponent reveal his weaknesses. Knowing his opponent's weaknesses, Matsunaga was able to exploit his weaknesses to manipulate his opponents to his will and easily extort his money. This is a typical scammer's method. Matsunaga is said to have called such people capitalists. According to Masayoshi Toyota, the characteristics of people who became Matsunaga capitalists are they have a pure personality, but somehow their screws are loose. They come from moderately well-off families, and they have children. Matsunaga, who caught the opponent's weakness, abused the opponent. His favorite method of abuse was electric torture. She served as an electrical advisor, drawing on knowledge Matsunaga learned from former electrical engineering employees at the company she ran before. At first, it was just a very weak electric shock that caused a tingling sensation, but the abuse gradually increased in intensity, including by spraying water on the victim. Matsunaga used it on world employees, and later he also used it on Toraya's daughter, and the Ogata family. However, she said only 5-year-old Yuki escaped the electric torture, but she did not believe it was inflicted even on the 3-year-old child of the woman she had assaulted, including 10-year-old Ayana, and even subjected her own 2 sons, whom she had with Junko, to electric torture. Matsunaga exploited the victims' weaknesses and abused them, forcing them to write various memorandums. There were 3 main contents. The first was that the other party promised to do something for Matsunaga in the future, and most of the contents were about carrying out Matsunaga's plans. The second involves the victim confessing her past weaknesses, which Matsunaga uses as an excuse to keep her victims from escaping. Third, she wrote a memorandum saying that Matsunaga would do something for her victims, and she made the other party believe that she would definitely keep the contents of this memorandum. The memorandum added the following. This memorandum was written in an absolutely peaceful atmosphere, and even recorded the reading of the document's contents on tape. Matsunaga mentioned this during the trial and insisted that all of her memorandums were written in a peaceful process. But of course, the court, which had already figured out what was going on, did not believe this. Matsunaga preys on their weaknesses and abuses them to force their victims to follow rules that limit their lives. These rules were so crazy that even in the cold winter, they only made you wear a thin layer of clothing. And if you were in a bad mood, they didn't hesitate to make you take off all your top clothes. In addition, they gave children only 1 set of clothes, made them do the laundry only occasionally, prohibited them from moving between rooms when moving around the house, and made it mandatory to crawl forward when moving between rooms. It is said that when he slept, he had to sleep on a newspaper spread in the kitchen without a blanket, and when his snoring was severe, he was locked in a locked bathroom, but the only time he could sleep was 3 or 4 hours in the middle of the day. She could only talk when Matsunaga allowed her to, and the meal was literally the ultimate in extremes. They had to eat 1 or 2 meals a day like beggars with newspapers spread out on the floor, and there was a time limit of only 7 to 15 minutes, and another victim had to act as a watchman and set the timer. The contents of the meals were very poor, consisting of delivery food or simple items purchased from convenience stores. Even when going to the bathroom, he had to defecate in front of other victims of the opposite sex with Matsunaga's permission. He could use all items only with Matsunaga's permission, and going out was extremely restricted. When he went out, he had to call Matsunaga one by one to see where he was and what he was doing. They say it had to be done. She says that Matsunaga mapped out her geography in her head, calculated her elapsed time in advance, and then asked her by what time she would arrive at her hometown. If these rules were violated, what awaited Matsunaga's abuse and her torture? Matsunaga sometimes delivered expensive food from good restaurants or ordered them to eat out, making his victims feel happy and making them more obedient to him. Matsunaga's method can be said to be the same as the typical tyrant's policy of humiliating the victims by inflicting merciless violence on them, and then making them more obedient by paying them some compensation. For reference, Matsunaga's method of controlling the lives of his victims is similar to the bite model, which is a typical method used by pseudo-religions to control believers. Criminals who lure people into committing crimes by misleading them with words can never target normal people. The things they say sound plausible because they are very eloquent, but if you look back at them calmly, there are many things that do not make sense, and there are also many weak points, such as quickly retracting what they just said. What is lacking in truth and logic in words is a psychopath and a fraudster. This is the main characteristic of these cases. When Matsunaga was on trial, he told incoherent lies and overturned his statements in court in an attempt to delay charges against the deceased victims. First, the victims were ranked with Matsunaga at the top. The person receiving electric torture was defined as the lowest human being, and electric torture was applied to Matsunaga's whims even for trivial reasons. When victims cursed or slandered other victims, they praised the victim and made them feel like they were superior human beings. It made me slander and curse. This was the reason why the Ogata family played into Matsunaga's hands. Because of this, the victims came to hate each other, and rather than unite and think of escaping from Matsunaga's clutches, they instead struggled with each other to become higher-ranking people who would receive Matsunaga's approval. She felt relieved when someone fell to a lower-level human, even though it was her family, and obeyed him absolutely to get Matsunaga's attention. At this point, it's hard to tell whether they're family or enemies. The reason the world was astonished was, how could the Ogata family kill each other and dismember each other's bodies without any hesitation? According to psychologists, the Ogata family was ultimately so completely psychologically dependent on Matsunaga that they received attention and recognition from him. It is said that they were so focused on only one thing that they had completely forgotten that they were family and had completely disappeared from their minds. Because of this, Matsunaga was able to easily kill and dispose of the body without touching himself. Matsunaga did not take any direct action, but rather led his victims to kill each other and dispose of the bodies. It is no exaggeration to say that the method of induction at this time is almost a modern version of Iago. Even when ordering the murder, he did not use clear language and led the victim to say, "I have no choice but to kill that person," preventing the prosecution from ascertaining the exact facts at trial. The body was mutilated and then thrown into a public restroom or thrown into the sea. Matsunaga calmly stated that this method of disposing of the body was my own original. I applied it to making stewed seafood, and she destroyed the evidence by having the pipes and tiles replaced. In the end, this case had to rely only on the criminal's statements and circumstantial evidence, without direct evidence. Tie for the two men. Junko's relationship was compared to a coachman whipping a whip and a galloping horse. On September 28, 2005, the Fukuoka District Court, the first trial court, ruled, because Matsunaga's testimony is inconsistent and contains many contradictions, 5 people were murdered under Matsunaga's instructions, 1 was killed directly, and 1 died, death from injuries. Junko's testimony is consistent with the testimony of Toraya's daughter, who was hostile to them due to Matsunaga's rule, and Junko is willing to testify against her. The circumstances of her father's attempt to resuscitate her were acknowledged, and the death due to injuries was acknowledged, but in Toraya's case, it was clear murder. He judged her to be guilty of the murder of her nephew and sister, and sentenced them both to death. Sentenced. Matsunaga appealed, and Junko tried to accept the verdict, saying that she had committed a crime deserving of death. But the defense team persuaded her that it was unfair for her to be sentenced to the same maximum sentence of death as Matsunaga in a situation where she was not in a normal mental state due to violence and governance issues. Agreed to appeal. In the second trial, Junko's problem was highlighted. The defense team made the argument that Junko should have her sentence reduced, as she was a victim of domestic violence and sexual assault and had become subject to Matsunaga. In response, a petition was posted by a sexual assault victims group asking for Junko's sentence to be commuted. On September 26, 2007, the Fukuoka High Court upheld the original sentence sentencing Matsunaga to death, but Junko argued that Kazuya, as a former police officer, participated in 2 murders, was not in a normal mental state due to violence. And although he was arrested, although Junko actively cooperated with the investigation and reflected on his crimes, Junko did not participate in the 3 murders, so it does not meet the Nagayama standard, which requires the death penalty except in extremely exceptional cases, such as insanity. Citing these factors, the previous ruling was overturned and a life sentence was imposed. Matsunaga appealed again, and Junko appealed, citing unfair sentencing by the prosecution. In December 2011, Japan's Supreme Court confirmed Junko Matsunaga's sentence, rejecting all appeals by Matsunagawa and the prosecution. The Supreme Court also said the death penalty can be considered for Junko, but it must be taken into account that she was in a psychological state where she had no choice but to comply with instructions given that she had been abused for a long period of time, and that it does not necessarily constitute the death penalty under the Nagayama standard. Additionally, there is no physical evidence. There is no reason to deprive him of his life and permanently isolate him from society, even though he actively cooperated with the investigation and uncovered the truth, since there is room for reform, he concluded. One Supreme Court judge said, "It is acknowledged that the defendant Junko Ogata's situation is difficult, and everything can be considered in the defendant's favor. But considering the seriousness of the heinous crime that cannot be found anywhere else, this case is unfortunate." He is said to have expressed an opposing opinion, saying, "There is no choice but to impose the death penalty." Futoshi Matsunaga is being sentenced to death and is being held in a detention center, while Junko Ogata is serving a life sentence in prison. Toraya's daughter also participated in the crime, but unlike Junko, she clearly committed the crime under coercion, so she escaped punishment as there was no expectation of committing the crime due to force majeure. And in 2011, she received news that she received compensation for crime victims. Lastly, nothing is known. We've reached the end of our story for today. I hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell for exclusive content, and leave your comments on the story. See you soon in a new video with another exciting story.